Yo YouTube, what's going on? This is Shok, and here's the video I promised I would put up later today. In this video, I want to pretty much reiterate what I've already been saying this whole time. And for those of you who may be new subscribers, new to my videos, basically in two videos I've done in the past where I was talking about the PS4 and the 720 and the Wii U, near the end of the videos I said, people need to lower their expectations for the power of the next generation consoles. But I wanted to go ahead and make a video dedicated to this topic matter so I could go more in depth with it and give you guys, more reasons as to why I'm making the claim I am making. Because the same gap between the PS2 and the PS3, I see a lot of gamers expecting between the PS3 and the PS4. And that is simply not going to happen, people. It's not going to be the same gap. I can promise you that. I can tell you that right now. And I'm going to explain why in this video. So let's get started. Okay, now firstly, Sony. Sony came out and reported that they lost $6.4 billion. $6.4 billion, which of course is a huge loss. That is a crazy loss. And then they went on to report that they'll be firing 10,000 employees, none of which will be from the gaming division, thankfully, but still 10,000 people are going to lose their job. And then it was also reported that Sony has not made a profit in the last 4 years, which is absolutely abysmal. Abysmal when you haven't been profitable for 4 years. I know some stupid people out there are going to take this as bashing when it's not. I'm just reporting. I'm just telling it like it is. But basically, I'm sure a lot of you already know where I'm getting at. Sony, as of right now, can't afford to come out with this supercomputer of a console that I see a lot of PS3 fans expecting. It's just simply not going to happen. They can't afford it right now. They can't. And I've said this before in a couple of PMs and comments to, Sony fans before. And what a lot of them like to bring up is, the fact that the Vita is really powerful. So since the Vita launched this year, that means that Sony is still in the whole, we have to make this powerful high-end console mindset. But that isn't necessarily the case, people, because what you got to understand is that a company doesn't decide their system specs the year the system launches. They decide the specs years in advance. You see what I'm saying? So the Vita specs were actually decided upon 3 to 4 years ago. So you really can't use that as a representation of Sony's current mindset. Now, moving on from this, a Sony CEO has actually came out on record and said that they're not going to invest so heavily into the PS4 specs as they did the PS3s. But I don't know why, but this quote just completely just went over people's heads. Like nobody talked about it, nobody reported on it. But I have it here for you guys, and I'm going to read it. Let me pull it up real fast. Okay, I just lost it. What's that, guys? Crap. And as you can see, here it is right here, and I'm going to read it. It's hard to say right now. I do not think we'll have a console with a lot better graphics than the PS3 currently offered. I believe the future will be to offer consumers better and more accessible experience. The aim will be to make more people enter the world of video games and try to design titles for women. Yeah, a vice president at Sony said that they're going to focus on appealing to the mass market and women. Now, that's not to say they're going to, stop making hardcore games. Of course, Sony's not going to do that. I couldn't imagine Sony doing that. Sony has always been about their core fan base, like without a doubt. But this pretty much insinuates that, they want to go the Wii route, as in, let's put out cheap hardware, but let's have a lot of, games that appeal to everybody on it. Just a lot like the Wii. But it's funny how, nobody reporting on this, people act like it didn't exist. Now, off of Sony now, I want to go to my second point I want to make, and that's developers. Developers have actually came out on record and expressed their fear for next generation costs. Basically, they don't want super high-end powerful consoles. For instance, we have Warren Spector here, and he was basically, in this article that I'm getting these snippets from, he was basically talking about how he fears next generation costs and development costs and things of that nature. And he was talking about how some games today already cost like $100 million to make. And he said next gen, if we have these super crazy high-end consoles, we're going to get 2, $3 million games to make, and he's scared about that. And what you guys gonna understand, I know some of you are gonna be like, well, Epic and Crytek, they want crazy high-end, consoles. Well, those are really big companies, people, and they can afford to develop on, high-end systems like that. But what you gotta understand is that they are a minority. They are a minority. They are, among the few developers who could afford, really pricey games like that. The majority of developers either can't afford it or they won't be willing to do it. And Warren Spector says the exact same thing in this same quote. He says there aren't a lot of companies that have the resources or the courage to spend that much. Which pretty much reiterates what I just said. So you see the point I'm making? Another developer, what's this dude's name? Let me pull it up. His last name is Brooksby. I forget the game he worked on because I'm just looking at the snippet right now for the quotes that you're looking at right now. But he said he came back from GDC and he saw excitement and fear in equal measure, dismay and triumph. A step to the next generation of classical consoles seems to have fear in a lot of people's eyes. And of course, he's talking about the next generation cost. And later in the article, he said he didn't expect costs for next generation hardware to rise significantly as during the last generation change. And catch that part, because that part is pretty much what, reiterates what I've been saying this whole time. Don't expect the same leap. And he's saying he doesn't expect the same, development costs gap, in the generational change. But anyways, but with such high costs, publishers will take safer bets on trusted development partners. And there's many other developers out there, who are like this. I just gave a few examples. I really don't need to keep on showing examples, over and over again, because you guys get it. It's been echoed plenty of times before. And developers, they don't want crazy high-end consoles. Now, I talked about Sony and why the PS4 won't be powerful. So let me talk about Microsoft now and the 720. The 720 is not going to be crazy powerful because it doesn't need to be. And Microsoft has no incentive to make it powerful. So you don't think Microsoft knows how much Sony has lost? You don't think Microsoft knows how much disarray they're in? So if they know good and well that Sony's not going to come out with a high-end console, then they're not going to have any incentive to make one themselves. You see what I'm saying? They don't have to worry about that because they know that Sony isn't going to go in and Nintendo isn't going to go in like that. Not to mention, Microsoft really isn't, they're not making any first-party exclusives for their system. They're not bringing any more exclusives to the system outside of, the Halo and, Forza. So you could pretty much say that, they're not going to go high-end because they're not all about the hardcore gamer now. You see what I mean? And Nintendo, of course, we all know Nintendo's not going to go all high-end because Nintendo came out and said that, they don't focus on tech specs. Now, that doesn't mean they don't care. They just said, that's not their focus. So, for those three reasons, all three companies are not going to go high-end next generation. And the title of the video, when I say, next generation is going to be weak, I'm talking about in comparison to your guys' expectations. You see what I'm saying? Of course, all three next-gen consoles are going to, to be noticeably more powerful than the current gen systems right now, but they're not going to be up to your expectations. They're going to be decently powered systems. Decently powered systems. So hopefully now I've convinced, you guys to kind of lower your expectations and see how next gen really is going to go down, because that's how it's going to go down. Like I said before, it's going to be a lot like last generation. The consoles are going to be closely spec'd. Yeah, one or two of the consoles may be, either noticeably weaker or noticeably stronger than the other, but for the most part, they're all going to be able to play the same games and run the same engines. That's how it's going to be. It's going to be a lot like last generation. I'm calling it right now, and you will see. But that's pretty much it for this video. I don't have to drag it on any longer. I might have another video up today or tomorrow, talking about the rumored specs for all three of the systems, which will also, kind of support the claims I'm making here. And although they are rumored, they make sense. So that's why I'm going to talk about them. But that's pretty much it for this video. Look forward to my other vid, guys, and I'll see you later.